Welcome to Discover the Ordinary. Today I'm here with the wonderful Brian Shanahan. Brian and I go way, way back where we spoke on some trade and receivables finance conferences on panels together and had many interesting chats in between in preparation about, about everything and anything. And this is what we're trying also to do today. And we stayed in touch, although I stayed in touch a little bit more than. And well, I told you this before this recording, is that Brian had, I have to say, unfortunately, right? You quit your podcast, I think, yeah. For I think 2021, it was the busiest year, and every second jog that I had, I took one episode with me because it was very much. In my mind, very much something that I connected to, because you explained technical concepts for non-technical people and connected them to the finance and trade finance industry. You had a blockchain episode I remember very well. You had a 3D printing episode where I learned some things. It was amazing because I don't know that much about manufacturing. And also for me, a very funny one about RFIs and RFPs and the for example. So really good stuff. Super that you can make the time. Looking forward to this. And please, intro yourself if you want, say a few words.
Well, I mean, for a moment there, Daniel, I really was feeling truly wonderful. So thank you very much for that. But just to set the rest of the world down just very slightly, for people who don't know me, I'm one of those lifetime consultants, and I have absolutely no shame about that whatsoever. And my specialities are around working capital and procurement. Yeah. But I think what brings us together, Daniel, is that you say, well, what's that got to do with, say, artificial intelligence or anything else, technological. And really, the link is that in all these disciplines, there's always technology coming along where someone's saying, "Oh, use this latest technology, and you will be doing whatever best practice, blah blah blah, there is going on at this particular time." Now, unfortunately, a lot of that is, I'll call it marketing horsewaddle. Not all of it, yeah, but a lot of it is, yeah. And one of the things that I've learned over many years is to try and filter through, what's the marketing hype versus what's actually a practical application. And it's funny, Daniel, that you mentioned the blockchain thing, because I'm sure I'm like many other people. 10 years plus ago, I'd be at a conference somewhere and someone's saying, "Oh, blockchain, this is the next greatest wonderful thing that's going to happen, and it's going to change the whole universe." And I think most people would probably say, "Oh, yes, I heard that as well," and it didn't. Yeah, which is not actually completely true. Yeah. It's just that the visibility of it it's dropped off the radar. But there is actually lots of blockchain stuff going on. Like if you're in the logistics world or shipping or something like that, blockchain is huge, absolutely huge and absolutely essential in moving stuff around the world today in a way that it wasn't 10 years ago. Yeah. And of course, lots of other things came with that. And I think the general theme of this is that you have people, say, in the finance world who tend to be practical. What's in it for me? What can I actually do with it in my business? Versus you have the creative IT people, and if we use blockchain as an example, we could use AI and lots of other subjects as well, where there's some new technology, and we have a real knack for inventing technologies that we actually don't know what to do with yet. Yeah. Yeah, if you remember back in the 90s, it was fiber optic cable, and many companies actually went completely broke laying fiber optic cable all over the world, and we had no idea what to do with it. We do now, with broadband and all the video conferencing and all this kind of stuff that we have now. But in the 1990s, none of that existed. Yeah. So, and I think we go at it again. We did it with blockchain. And I think now the latest subject, of course, is artificial intelligence. Yeah, So everyone's going on. It's going to change the world. It's going to make us all unemployed. It's going to, change the world into a giant dictatorship or some disruption, whatever. There's all these things being said about it, most of which will turn out to be overhyped nonsense. But there are actually real applications for this stuff, which there are lots of real people in real businesses very practically exploring these things.
Mm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. You saw me nodding, and it's just very hard to frame the discussion in a way that is productive, because we have many people with many backgrounds, or if you want to take the two camps, let's say in our shared industry, then we have, let's say, financial or business people, and then the technical people. Both can be more creative, but it's just very hard. And then we have the geopolitical discussions, in the news, and it's just very hard to stay grounded and to have some tangible use cases and even talk about them. This is really possible. How do we build a prototype? How do we make the first transaction? Like back 10 years ago on the blockchain or whatever. How do we actually do that? And why are we actually doing that? For example.
Yeah. I'll tell you something interesting. I was listening to here's a real old-fashioned thing. I was listening to the radio this morning. Yeah. And one of the people on this particular news show was Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who is basically telling everyone that he's terribly worried that with artificial intelligence, that terrorists will get control of this and do something awful thing. And unfortunately, he's probably right. But at the same time, this is what we get on the news. It's the sensational thing that we should all be really worried about, as opposed to the probably far less sensational things what's this stuff actually going to be for? What's it really, really going to do that's going to make a difference in people's day-to-day lives? And I think media-wise, that whole point is getting missed. And to be fair to the journalistic world, most of those guys don't understand it either, in the same way as 90% of the rest of humanity. So why should they be different in terms of what they think about?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, this is how, and especially with nowadays, and also 10 years ago, with clicks and ads, everything has become a tabloid in a way. The social media is more of a tabloid, and of course you have exceptions. But the rules, you need to generate clicks and ad revenue or maybe some subscriptions, and then you can have some nice content. But it makes it very hard. So for anyone in this structure, in this system, to actually talk about maybe the boring stuff, but the useful stuff, and that is also one goal that I have here, after we frame the discussion, that we try, to attack it. Like I take the role maybe of the IT guy here in this discussion, and in you of the trade finance working capital expert, and then we try, and I really believe, this is the way forward, even if you're on a project team, research and development, that, our sides and our brains need to talk to each other, and then we get some nice use cases. And I know you have some. We talked about a couple of ideas before, and then we're getting somewhere, and then you can say, Daniel, that doesn't make any sense. That's not a problem that needs solving, for example, in the business world. And I can say, that's not a large language model business case, for example. That would be something else, I really believe in that.
Well, I think one of the things that's very important about all these things of what let's just take AI. What's it going to be about? When we're here in 10 years' time, what we'll look back and say, well, actually, this is what it turned out to be about, as opposed to what we think it might be at this point. And we've seen kind of many inflections in technology history in the last century. The most notable one is if you were old enough to be around at the dot-com boom of the late 90s. Some of the businesses that were being started, in hindsight, were utterly ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you could say anything like, washmywindows.com, and someone was sticking several $1 million into it. And I mean, just as business concepts, they were just really, really crazy. Yeah. And of course, we're never ever going to work. Yeah. But then, of course, there was some that really, really did work. Yeah. Like take Amazon. Amazon was of that generation, and it's one of the biggest businesses on the planet, doing all sorts of things with a core technology which was developed around books. Which actually now we apply to. I want to buy the latest Malaysian brand of chocolates or something like this. Yeah, but and everyone's copied that very successfully. Yeah. So this is kind of the way things turn out. And it's quite interesting when we talk about AI in this respect. I mean, I remember when I first heard the term being bandied around in commercial circles, which is probably 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And of course, this was the marketing thing, of, whatever we're doing, we better say there's AI involved, and even though there wasn't, quite frankly, in the vast majority of cases, and the people, they were software developments. Nothing wrong with software developments, but that's what they were. They just attached this AI thing to make it sound a little bit dreamier and mystique driven than it really was. Yeah. But I think what's changed in the meantime is now you'll hear people use this term generative AI, which is a little bit more accurate, because it's not the AI of HAL Computer, in 2001: Space Odyssey, who's really thinking and learning for itself. We're not there yet. I'm sure that will happen at some point in the future, but we're nowhere near that. But when we talk about generative AI, what it really is something that operates at a computing speed level, which is just absolutely unprecedented. Even if we talk about, the mega chips that were being, frozen to, 0 Kelvin and all this kind of stuff to do all the fast transactions and so on, and supercomputers a decade ago, all those things have been completely surpassed, completely. Yeah. And it's, in this sense, this is like the fiber optic issue. Yeah. We now have a technology which can do computing at a ridiculously fast speed, absolutely ridiculously fast speed versus what we could do only 5 years ago. But we haven't actually thought up things we can do with it. Yeah. And if I give you an example, something, Daniel, that I'm actually working with right now, I run a database called TermsCheck, which is a payment database. Yeah. So I'm not going to go into the whole advert about it and so on and how wonderful it is, which of course it is. Yeah. But the technology that it was actually based on, and I won't go too deeply into it, but it's now 10 years old. Yeah. And it still works and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it takes a considerable piece of old-fashioned computer horsepower to actually get this thing done. Yeah. Now, when we introduce generative AI, it's a complete game changer. Yeah, because it means that the thing that took 6 hours now can take 6 seconds, literally, and it's unbelievably powerful. But what you need to think about is two things. One, very much the structure, and I know, Daniel, you've worked on this. The structure of what are you asking it to do? Yeah, that's the one important thing. And the second important thing is whatever it is you're asking it to do, is that actually a commercial application? So, for instance, what I'm trying to do with this is to, one, make the whole thing faster. If I'm being perfectly selfish, to make it more convenient to run that business. Yeah. So, you can do more, bigger, faster queries and so on. But the other thing I want to do is to try and democratize the whole concept. Yeah. Because one issue when you do any kind of benchmarking at that supplier customer level, that level of detail, is it's very data hungry, and where you get data sources, is it can be very privileged. Whereas if you have this kind of technology, the plan is to democratize that in the sense of open it up to literally hundreds of thousands of people in finance and procurement who can not only source information from this very easily, but contribute information to this very easily, which has not been something that we've been able to do in the past. And that is new, you know. Now, I'm sure, within a year that will not be new, but right now it's new, It's the way things go, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that kind of interests me about this. So if you say, say in the medical world, are we suddenly going to have robots, doing heart surgery, anytime soon? No. Yeah. Help maybe, but not do it. On the other hand, if you're talking about using AI technology to, vastly multiply the productivity of someone who's screening, for breast cancer or something like that.
That's it.
Massive application, and people have been doing it now for several years, and improving that. So there's many really practical things out there, where this is actively being used, and again, many things we simply haven't thought of yet.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely on point. I think, and I like this medical example because pattern recognition is literally what this is about. Like machine learning, learning about patterns, and then finding them in other data sets. That's what you actually like. At 8 months back, I looked at your newsletter, and there was a piece about LLMs, and which is wonderful because this is when we start becoming much better. Like June last year, some models released, and a lot of things changed by then, and some marketing buzz became actually real. And you were talking, and I also you were talking about speed, and I want to kind of add on top of that the contextualization, kind of like chatting with your data and getting a narrative out of your data, maybe. And not every, a lot of our listeners and viewers will be from the trade finance space. This is kind of the network, but could you just explain in what way with terms check, what kind of narrative or what kind of advantage do you get putting an LLM, a large language model, on top of this data, and also what is it good for? What would someone do there? Like just a really simple one for the people that are not from the industry.
Well, just to explain what terms check actually does in its very simplest, and then the kind of the variants that people can ask for after that. At its very simplest, if you have supplier X, who trades across the world, and let's say we say supplier X in Uruguay, and you're simply curious to say, these guys have offered me 30-day payment terms. What do they offer everybody else? The database has information from other companies who have dealt with X Limited, and then you get a range from 0 to 90 or whatever it is. And the idea is then you can see where you are on the spectrum. Now that's the most basic query that terms check will do. But along the way, people have come along and said, yeah, but you know what? I don't know all the companies I want to compare with. And actually, I'm dealing with the construction industry in Texas. Okay. And by the way, I want the construction industry in Texas, but only for those companies who did contracts in Austin. Oh, and the very minute we start, adding layers of data on this, the traditional program, it then slows it down because you're putting layers and layers and layers on a query. So naturally, it will take longer for this thing to work its way out. The expectation, with AI applied to this problem is that this is why I say you need to structure the question. So think of it like when you go and search on Google, or Bing, or being fair about it. You put in construction Texas, and you'll get some kind of gigantic list, I'm sure, of hundreds and thousands of companies who do that in Texas. And then you'll be more specific about construction roofing, and then you narrow the list, and then by geography. So we naturally do that when we do internet searches, that we narrow and narrow and narrow our search, and we get frustrated with it because it didn't do it the first time and all that kind of stuff. In some senses, AI is a little bit similar. That the more focused we make the question on the data, the more likely it is that we're actually going to get an answer that's actually relevant to us. But, and this is the second bit, is we can do that amazingly quickly. Amazingly quickly, just in the same way as you can do with an internet search, but even faster. And if we really do it right, then this is where AI can be different from something like Google, that it can be a little bit intuitive in the sense of, well, last time, we asked for construction, roofing, Texas, Austin, all that kind of stuff. But the next time, it's not necessarily just going to copy the query that you asked for before, but it's learning what you asked for, and therefore it tries to predict what you might want. Now, you might say a lot of the time it's actually going to get that wrong, which it will, but a lot of the time it might come up with something that you wouldn't have thought of as a variant. And you look at this and you go, now that is actually interesting. And if you think of it, if anyone who does any kind of financial modeling of any kind, you actually spend a lot of time thinking about what do I want the outcome to be, because it's going to take a lot of time to build a model that creates that outcome. Well, what if you're in a situation where actually creating outcomes from the data is ridiculously easy? And again, lots of them. And then lots of them will be completely useless and tell me nothing, But I'll get the ones that I thought of already, and I'll get other variants that I never would have thought of, but it's actually built on the same data set. And I get it very quickly, And that will then, in terms of data modeling, will provide me insights which I otherwise would never have had.
Exactly. That would have been, because I completely agree with you that speed, because you were talking about speed a lot of time, like the USP, and this is how a lot of people also see it. And what you just said is that's what I've been preaching basically on this channel for a couple of months now, is the added context and the learnings that you can get from a vast amounts of data, because now you're not really building a model, you're not filtering on Excel or in a database, you're asking a question. Of course, we need to know what kind of prompt, what kind of question we need to ask. But even if we ask a bad question, I think nowadays, or not the perfect question, the model can guide us in a way. It gives us an answer that is partially right, or introduces some new vocabulary that we can use to just in the days when we learned how to Google many years ago, 20 years ago, or not more, 25 years ago maybe. Where we did a Google search, and then there was a result, and then like, okay, how do I do this thing? And then there was the right term, just the right term. And what I always want to stress, I mean, this is of course a tool from experts for experts, what you're just describing. But sometimes, when I find myself, and I'll go through my cases, my use cases in a bit, is that I use a large language model for a very exploratory task, even, where I am not an expert in, and I use it to structure my thoughts and to come to some kind of goal that I don't even have in mind yet. This is a bit more in the general tool set, I would say. You have a very specific tool to a very specific industry, but and then of course you can apply. You can say, hey, I arrived at that faster, but without that context that we are adding and the learning we have, maybe I would have never reached that goal at all. This is a feeling I had quite often in the last few months, because I just wouldn't know how, I would have had to hire a consultant or something like this without the LLM, right?
Yeah, but an analogy on this is that if you were doing computer coding in the late 1950s, early 1960s in binary, it was a very slow process, and you had to be very careful with it. and you had to be you needed to think very carefully about what your desired outcome was. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah.
because we didn't have the computing power. We didn't have so many things we take for granted today. So if you talk to people who were programmers from those days, yeah,
Mm.
and remember there was no such thing as doing a computer science degree or anything like it didn't
Yeah.
exist. It was all completely new. These
Yeah.
people, they were chemists, they were physicists, they were mathematicians, they were, they came from very select, scientific professions. And and the reason they hired people like that was because you need to be thinking so far ahead with
Yeah.
because of all those limitations. Now, if you look at programming today, and the classic one is if you look at something like Microsoft Excel, yeah,
Mhm.
okay, millions and millions and millions of people use it, and millions of anyone in the computing world would say the coding is complete crap. Yeah, and
Yeah.
why? Because they've allowed this kind of backwards integration. So if you bought the very first version in 1988 or something like this, or whatever it was, yeah, that it's still compatible with buying the latest version that you got just yesterday in the store. Yeah,
Mm.
but the result of that is there's a gigantic amount of lazy code in there. Yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
absolutely gigantic. Whereas if this was back in the 60s, someone routinely edited every single line of code to make it as efficient as possible. And nobody does that now. Nobody's done that now for decades. I'd be even surprised if there's that many people left alive who even know how to do such a thing. Yeah, because now we have much more powerful computers. We have different levels of intelligent code and so on, which the whole thing just keeps evolving like this. And so in that sense, AI is going to do this again in the sense that what you were talking about, Daniel. Say,
Mhm.
well, I could think very carefully about this is the one outcome I want, or actually the thing gives me 30 different outcomes,
Mhm.
and most of them are probably rubbish. But do you know what? I could end up with 6 really good ones
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
easily,
Yeah.
rather than just one, which I had to think carefully about.
Yeah. This is really interesting. This is an analogy I wanted to use in a post, but I will use it now. Exactly. Now the new paradigm that seems to be happening. I mean, this is just me. No, talking, is that this kind of like a inverse Pareto principle, which means 80-20, right? The 20% of the time is most efficiently spent, or 20% of your customers, make you the most revenue. And I think in the past, computers did 20% of the work. Yeah, let's just say, and we did, and we had to kind of fill in these gaps. We had to edit the lines, something like this, but we still had to do the majority of the work, let's say, and we still do, especially before large language models. And now this dynamic gets kind of flipped, so that the large language model gives you all these options. It gives you, you're writing a social media post, you're writing an article, for example. It gives you actually the whole article, and you edit it in partnership with the large language model. That's what I do. I built a model. I trained it on my texts, and then on my progressively better texts, because they got better since, unfortunately, the large language model in conjunction with me writes much better than I alone. Uh, very, very sad to admit, but it's the case. Then I train it on that. And stylistically, sometimes you have a little bit of problems, because, I mean, it works by predicting text, although it's not just predicting the next word after word. It's based on the transformer architecture from Google 2017, which takes much bigger contexts in basically into memory, and then relates them to each other in importance, and that's it kind of figures out what's important in a sentence, what does it relate to, and builds an abstract map kind of relationships between the words, and tries to find out the topic, and somehow mimics human thought, and can fool us in a way that it's thinking. But sometimes the output gets a bit recognizable as AI written content, with the hyphens. You find a lot of LinkedIn posts with that kind of stuff, but you can really mitigate that by training it on your own writing, and then just editing, some things, editing out, and that's why it's just still just predicts text, but it gets better and better. I mean, what we saw in the last few months, it was just crazy. The improvements that we saw, and really this paradigm. And back to your coding example, I mean, I code not every day, but I make some applications, I make some experiments, train my own models, and literally the same thing is happening. You tell it in natural language what to do. Everybody can do this, and you can go online for free. There are some tools that you can say, you know what, I want a web app. Just code me what did I do, like a to-do list tracker or something like that, and it will do that. Or code me just a chat GPT window, the graphical user interface for that, and no, make it black, make it blue, make it green, and it gets the progress is quite scary. A lot of people hate this, a lot of developers hate this, a lot of writers also hate this in a way, or having difficulties with this. And I think it's an opportunity that will change how we interact with computers, with software, and even the world. If we just say, like you said, some good templates are already out there, and we become more of we don't play in the orchestra that much. We become the conductor. We just and we are still needed. that's
Well, you
the,
see, that's the essential point, Daniel, because that's what I was thinking all the time that you were talking about that, in terms of, lots of people get the impression that, well, AI is going to come along and basically take away the need for people. Personally, I don't think that's true, because just take the example that you were given. That there's a lot of very powerful things it can do. Yeah. But what it still needs the direction of a person or people, in terms of, so what is it going to do and why, and with what emphasis. So, for instance, if someone wants to, write a book in the style of the way I speak, I mean, that's mimicry, and an intelligent, very powerful computer, which is largely what AI is, can do that. I can do it quite quickly. It might not be very entertaining, probably maybe a little bit more entertaining than me, but it wouldn't be that good. What's actually that good is what are the ideas that people are putting into this. And that's where the technology is nowhere near that level of creativity. Because the interesting thing about the technology world that we live in is, since the 90s, we've been building these information systems all over the place, be it web crawlers, be it ERP systems. But we have gigantic amounts of data, absolutely gigantic amount of data. And we largely haven't touched most of it. Even within one company, never mind kind of doing anything kind of broader than that, because either one, we didn't have the computing power, or two, we didn't actually have the power of intellect to kind of figure out, what in the name of God do we want to do with this stuff? What could possibly be useful of looking at 10 years worth of inventory data? What's it going to tell me? I've got no idea, because actually my problem is I've got my next quarter targets I've got to fulfill, because if I don't do that, I get fired. But you know what? Sitting back and thinking interesting thoughts, with a very good cup of coffee, is not going to pursue my career in any great way. Because that's what. And ultimately people get motivated by this. Not the minority of, there's always the people who are way ahead of time in terms of the curve, and they're way ahead of everybody else. But most people are not like that, and there's a long history with all this stuff that people end up doing where the money went, or where the money was going. So therefore, to take what I was saying about the .com boom, there was all sorts of things that people came up with, but the things that actually had a real commercial application worked, and they worked very well. And that actually is the same as any business. and any technology we might apply at any time, and that will continue into the future. Yeah. So, you can say, wouldn't it be great if we had, ion engines or something like this to go around the place, yeah, just to kind of pop down to the shops. But actually, commercially, that would be mad, yeah, wouldn't make any sense at all, yeah. So the likelihood that we're going around in some kind of electric vehicles or something like this for centuries to come is probably what we're going to do, yeah. Not to say those other technologies aren't there, but it's finding the right application, the right case, for these things to happen. I mean, you see, for instance, at the moment, well, what's these helicopter taxi things you see in places like Dubai?
That was a German thing as well.
Yeah,
oh God, please don't.
but I mean, in terms of someone experimenting with technology, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, you got to hand it. The level of innovation is truly fantastic. Yeah, but ask a different question to say, okay, does everybody want to, pop to the supermarket in a helicopter? Well, probably not. Yeah,
maybe not. Yeah, it's also dangerous.
These things won't work and they won't find their application, but sometimes these things struggle to find their application. Yeah, but eventually they do, and they find their niche. Yeah, and that's very often where they stay for a very long time. Yeah.
And I think, and a very funny thing maybe to point out the difference, and please challenge me on this, the difference between, let's say, large language model AI and other technologies is that it can help us to develop itself. And it can kind of develop itself if you use automation and agents. Just to give an example, like, let's get back to the use cases as well. We talk, I'm not an inventory expert or anything like that. ABL is where I draw the line kind of for me, I was in factoring for a long time or factoring software, but what we could do is, we ask, we make a prompt, and that's what I do quite often. I just start talking to a large language model and do the speech to text feature. So I talk 5 minutes, 10 minutes about a very open-ended problem, and I use some tricks of prompt engineering, but really is very unstructured in a way. And I would, if I talk about inventory data of a big corporate, for example, I would say, and I know nothing about this, okay? So I would just say, you know what? I have this data. I have this much data. I have this many items, and they're itemized by the following. For example, I have my business is this. I give it context, right? My intermediate goals are this, and then I would ask, is there anything I'm missing here? Is there anything this data could tell me? How can I interrogate that data, or do I have to structure it in a different way before? And then something good will come around. I get like a more structured output, 100%. Since like I said, since June we made gigantic leaps, and more often than not, at least for me, I got some new ideas I wasn't thinking about yet, and I can always ask it to structure it back to me. Have you ever, like, does that make sense?
I think you're absolutely right, Danny. I think one thing we need to be careful of in terms of the internet, because for instance, in that kind of query, your AI engine will go off and crawl the internet and find all sorts of things, which you couldn't possibly find in a lifetime, and you do that fairly well, very well, in fact, What it can't do, and we've seen this with many of the kind of these newspaper type outlets who are trying to use AI, or some guy trying to do his law degree exam with AI or something like this, the AI will pick up whatever's out there. It doesn't know what the information that you've given it, whether it's right or wrong. It just knows it's there, and it will do something with it and interpret and all this kind of stuff and do all those wonderful things. But if it's wrong, it's just going to just reflect back something that's also wrong. Just do it very, very fast, and very, very intelligently. And you take the business with you mentioned the inventory data. What it will do, if I tried to work out what's the minimum stock level I could have with all this data, and it would calculate a safety stock, and there is There's safety stock calculations out there on the internet. It would find them. It would do those calculations. There you
Mm-hmm.
go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
However, lots of people who are really in the know about this will tell you that actually the best algorithms to use are not on the internet. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they're very very closely held by actually people like me, but I'm not the only one. Yeah, so that they're not on the internet. Yeah. And this is just one case. I mean, there's many things like that. Yeah. So therefore, you could either come up with something that's just plain wrong. Yeah. But you as the user might not know that because even if you did a search personally, it's not the AI's got it wrong. It's just the information out there is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
or the information is limited. So in the case of the safety stock calculation, there are lots of calculation methods out there which are actually technically correct. Yeah. They're just not the ones which are used by the people who are really at the top of their game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're
Yeah.
not in the right situation for that or something like that. That's the thing that the AI won't know because it's completely dependent on the information that it's given. If the information is limited or wrong, it will mimic the effect of whatever that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about hallucinations, the thing that everybody hates, like the AI or the LLM makes up something that is not true, for example, that also happens. It's not even that, because I mean, it has its training data, which is basically, all of the internet, all of the scraped internet.
Yeah.
As we find out more and more, some legal gray areas might have been crossed by some players to train the models, which doesn't surprise me. You need all the data that you can get. Basically you train it on all the books that humanity has ever written in a way, and maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, but without paying anyone for anything. But no,
Yeah,
it's true. But
the same way, Dan, just because something was in a book doesn't mean it's
yeah,
correct.
that's true. That's absolutely true. And that's why there are several strategies to mitigate this. Actually, these hallucinations. Of course, model quality, like I said, this is it's insanely high compared to a year ago or something like that. So that alone makes it better. Then you have to have an expert sitting there, especially if you are talking about business critical processes. Something, you treat it like sometimes like a junior employee, I would say, something like this. Sometimes, now with the models that we have, sometimes it reaches PhD levels in some sectors, in some cases, science, business cases. You have that, and then you can train it really on your own data, and this is very critical. If you have your own business and if you're a corporate, for example, you have this kind of data and you have these kind of algorithms or uh, or calculations, so you can use them and then still use the large language model to either interrogate the data or enhance your understanding of the whole process. I'm going to feed it my ideas, my algorithms, and say, is this my code? And that's what it can do. Fix this, or tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what could be wrong with it. Fix this semantically, or from an abstract perspective. Fix the idea in a way. And then on top of that, there's a thing called retrieval augmented generation, where you have, and that's actually something that I'm doing right now. It sounds super complicated. It's not that complicated. It's basically you have how can a large language model get to data like in abstract, right? It has its training data, so it's huge. It's a huge amount of text and all images, all these kinds of things. Then it can crawl the web, like you said. Then a thing like Perplexity or GPT search sends an agent out to do those queries for you and returns with some data. Like you said, in some business cases, that might not be the smartest thing to do, because even if you're looking for a restaurant, it might not be the smartest thing to do in some village or Bavarian village or something. But then you can also use it with your own data in a way. Yeah, like let's say you are building an FAQ, a software FAQ or something like that, and you upload and you have to manipulate the data in a way that you it's called chunking. You take small parts and you label them correctly. Hallucination goes down to almost zero or zero, and if not, then people will spot it. So there are ways to direct the model in these specific business cases. But I agree. I mean, at least you need an expert probably in the tech or in the business, at least in setting up this thing, and then using this thing might be easy, in some fringe cases, and sometimes I mean, I use this, so just full disclosure is I use this for research purposes, which is a great business case for this, right? I found this book on a flea market, which is Harvard Conference, 1997, what will be the internet be like in, I don't even know, 20 years or something like that, right? And there was not Eric Schmidt, but I don't know if the Google, but Bill Gates was there, let's say. But they made a really nice book out of this. And then I looked up McKinsey reports and then I thought, I want to produce a report as a consultant, for example, that highlights the history and the fears that we associate with a new tech. Where are they similar? Where are they different? Because I think that, like, for me, this is why I'm also doing this. I think that large language models and AI are different than blockchain or other things like that in a way, like because of the self-learning and stuff like that. And what you can, and you basically ask them, you use the model as kind of like a context engine, and you tell it to, okay, you can tell it to do things, right? That's called a system prompt. Like before it starts thinking about stuff, you tell, okay, you help me with this research. It's for a PhD, or it's for a report to a client. You give it the context, you give it the output modes, you give it the footnotes, and then you just ask it, what are the top 10 common fears that you can spot here, like really exploratory. And even with not that much work put into this, the results are quite astounding of what you're going to find. And there's at least, in my case at least, there was at least one thing that I learned from each session while I did this, additionally to the technical knowledge. But okay, let's not talk about that nerdy stuff. But yeah, does that make sense?
My opinion, Daniel, is everything. I agree with everything you're saying, but the role of the expert actually becomes more important, not less.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you're into any kind of analytics, be it text, data, numerics, whatever it is, traditionally when it comes to analysis, you actually spend a lot of time doing the analysis. Yeah. Not examining what the outcomes of are the analysis of the analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you talk about that 80-20 rule again, you're probably spending far more time building a model, whatever that might be, to give you an output that you can then interpret, rather than the interpretation, which is actually the value add part of the whole exercise. Yeah. So when you talk about AI, the idea is you're dramatically collapsing the time frame for the analysis part, and leaving more time for that interpretation of the analysis, which is actually the intelligent bit. Yeah. Now that means that good news is for the person who's doing that interpretation, you've got lots more time to do it. You can be more careful about it. All sorts of luxuries that very often you might not have. But it also means that it becomes, when it's easy to do all this. Imagine, say in a consulting team, very often there's different people, who are people doing this analysis work, and then there's these people doing the interpretation work. And you find this in consulting, that I can have the wrong people doing the interpretation work. Yeah. There was nothing wrong with the analysis, and those guys did a fantastic job, but I just had the wrong person doing the interpretation, which means they came up with the wrong interpretation. It wasn't the data, it wasn't the analysis, it wasn't anything. It's just wrong guy. And we're going to see lots more cases of this with AI, because it's so much easier to do that analytical part, the grunt work, as it were. That it's going to become more and more important that actually when we are looking at whatever the outcome is, whatever the subject is, that we actually have a real expert who can interpret this to say, say from what you were talking about, Daniel, when you're editing the data, editing this this prototype report at the end of it. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's where you actually require the experience and knowledge to say, oh, that doesn't look quite right. Maybe I need to change that or check this bit or something like this. And
Mhm.
the you see this, and the other issue is, again, it goes back to the underlying data. If the data is wrong, then the whole thing will be wrong. I mean, a very good example, we see things all the time where you hear some story of someone was driving their car in a village they didn't know, and they ended up driving off the end of a bridge into a river. And then when they asked them, say, well, what was I doing? Oh, I was following the GPS, and that's where it told me to go. Yeah.
Yes.
So they interpreted everything absolutely correctly. It's just the data was wrong. Dangerously wrong in this case. But and the same possibilities, keep, and that's then when you kind of roll forward back to the expert role. This is normally what an expert role does in interpretation. So if you take the consulting project, a team of people, do a whole bunch of things to put together some kind of a report that's going to be given to a client. There is always one person who does the final vetting of all this to say, does this make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that person can only do that job well. They might not be the greatest analyst in the world, but they have to be able to understand what they're looking at to say, does this make sense?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you're very dependent on that individual in terms of what their qualities and expertise are as to how well they do that.
Yeah.
And that's why in the consulting world, unfortunately, you see a lot of really ordinary reports, very ordinary reports, with no real insight whatsoever, because it's the quality of the person doing that interpretation has not been that good, and that's not firm specific, by the way. That's it's a reflection of that entire community, and there's a percentage who are quite brilliant at this, but it's a small percentage. And we'll find the same thing in this kind of thing, that we're going to enable lots of people to do this interpretation that they've never been able to do before, which is fantastic. But we're then additionally going to have to filter out between all these different outcomes we never had before. A lot of them are going to be rubbish.
Yeah.
I mean, if you remember, well, you're probably not old enough, Daniel, but when I was very small, I lived in a house where we had one TV channel, one.
Yeah. I had 3. That was the
And
lowest that I ever had. Yeah.
and now, be it internet, TV, cable, whatever, we have thousands.
You
And
never have to leave your house if you don't want to.
the majority of them are utter rubbish. In any language you care to pick.
Mm.
And actually, the job then of the viewer. So the job of the viewer in back in the 60s or even the 70s was, basically learn how to turn on the TV because there was nothing else to do.
Mm.
And now it's that whole interpretation of, well, do I want to watch a documentary or a science fiction movie or this? You have so many different choices, and the quality of what you end up, going into your brain, is very much dependent on the person making the choices. Because equally, I could be, spend the afternoon watching crappy game shows. Same person can make the same choices.